The air inside the Apex Capital skyscraper was not just cool, it was aggressively cold, a climate control system designed to keep minds sharp and emotions suppressed. Sunlight, reflecting off the glacial glass curtain walls of Manhattan, sliced through the 40th floor conference room, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the $10,000 mahogany table. The only sound, aside from the distant, muted hum of city traffic, was the low, rapid click of the mouse beneath Jian Li's manicured thumb. Jian Li, the CEO, was a study in ruthless efficiency. Every hair was lacquered into place, his dark, bespoke suit flowed with an expensive, silken rigidity, and the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist was a constant, ticking testament to his earned power. Today was the final dry run for the Taurus acquisition, a $500 million deal that would either cement his legend or leave a hole in his quarterly report. Tucked into a shadow corner, trying desperately to become part of the beige wall, was Elara Smith. 8 months pregnant, every hour was a lesson in physical strain, but she needed this temporary admin job. Her synthetic blouse felt hot and scratchy against the cold marble tabletop. She looked up only when necessary, monitoring the slides and Jian's increasingly agitated breathing. She was supposed to be invisible, a temporary fixture absorbing phone calls and refilling water glasses, but Elara was also meticulous. David, Jian's permanent executive assistant, a young man perpetually fueled by espresso and fear, stood guard by the door. He caught Elara's eye, a silent warning to blend in. Jian was at the breaking point of tension. $500,954,321, Jian articulated, his voice a low, precise instrument, pointing a laser at the projected ROI slide. That is the number we take to the board. It is tight, it is aggressive, and it is flawless. Send it. He stabbed the send key on his keyboard. Wait, Mr. Li. Elara's voice was barely a squeak, cutting through the sterile silence like a broken shard of glass. She instantly regretted the interruption, but the sheer gravity of the error compelled her. She felt her cheeks flush crimson with shame and fear. Jian froze. He retracted his hand slowly, the clicking of his watch now deafening. He didn't turn around immediately. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The total is incorrect, sir, Elara continued, her breath catching in her throat as she pushed through the terror. The Q4 projection uses a discounted rate of 0.058, not 0.58. It's an exponential error. If you use the correct decimal, the total is closer to 450 million. David's jaw dropped. The figure, if corrected, meant a $50 million difference. Jian had been minutes, seconds, away from submitting a projection that was utterly wrong, a blunder that would have annihilated his credibility with the board and potentially sunk the entire deal. The room held its breath. Jian finally turned, but there was no gratitude in his gaze. There was only a cold, corrosive fury. And who asked you? Jian's voice was dangerously quiet, his tone dripping with acidic condescension. He didn't thank her for saving his job. He looked at her as if she had just tracked mud across his pristine marble floor. You are a temporary administrative hire, Elara. Your job is to facilitate, not to analyze. You broke concentration on the most crucial step of this acquisition. Do you understand the cost of distraction? Elara felt the unfairness of the attack hit her like a punch to the gut. The immense pressure of her pregnancy seemed to multiply under his harsh glare. I apologize for the interruption, sir. I simply didn't want you to. Don't want me to what? Jian sneered, stepping closer, his expensive cologne filling her corner of the room. Need saving? I don't need saving from a temporary functionary. I need silence and efficiency. Your input was unsolicited, unnecessary, and frankly, unprofessional. His eyes, cold and assessing, traveled pointedly down her body, lingering for a calculated, agonizing second on the swollen curve of her abdomen. That look conveyed more than any spoken word. You are a liability. You are weakness, and you will be eliminated. Elara went silent, shame burning hotter than her fear. She knew then that she had signed her own termination papers by daring to be right. David, watching the entire exchange, nervously adjusted his tie. He gave Elara a quick, helpless look, slightly shaking his head as if to say, "He's too far gone. Just take the hit." The storm had begun, and Elara, the timid, pregnant assistant, was trapped right in the center of Jian Li's ruthless, prejudicial gaze. The office lights felt too harsh, the marble too slick, as Jian Li paced his corner office, the conference room blunder still stinging his pride. He was trying to justify Elara's inevitable termination to himself, repeating the mantra, "Systemic risk must be eliminated." But the truth of his cold calculus lay 15 years in the past, under the humid, oppressive sky of Shenzhen, China. Jian was not born to this wealth, he earned it with a ferocity that bordered on trauma. The smell of cheap ramen and stale computer sweat clung to that memory. He was a brilliant immigrant entrepreneur, 25 years old, signing the deal of his lifetime with an American venture capitalist named Barbara. Barbara, a woman who wore entitlement like a shield, had flown in on a private jet and spent the entire signing meeting checking her phone and loudly complaining about the local cuisine. Her silk dress cost more than Jian's entire apartment. She treated him not as a partner, but as an exotic curiosity. "Look, Jian, I love the tech," Barbara had drawled, her voice grating on his ears like sandpaper. "But frankly, your operation lacks finesse. You need to understand how things work in the real world, the American world." Jian had swallowed his pride, remembering the meager bank account and the desperate need for capital. He signed. 6 months later, Barbara pulled out. Not because the product failed, it was thriving, but because she decided his cultural lack of ambition was too much of a risk. Right before she casually announced she was taking a break from work due to a surprise pregnancy. That betrayal wasn't just financial, it was existential. She used a life event as a shield for unprofessional greed, leaving Jian financially gutted, his dream crushed, and his spirit permanently scarred. He learned that entitlement, especially when combined with family obligations, was a plague on business efficiency. Snapping back to the present, Jian slammed his hand down on his desk, the sound muffled by the thick, soundproof wood. The sight of Elara, heavily pregnant and correcting his work, had dredged up every bitter, shaming memory of Barbara. He saw entitlement, softness, and inevitable distraction. She had to go. Meanwhile, Elara was attempting to appear busy at her desk, the constant, dull ache in her lower back forcing her to shift every few minutes. David slid up to her cubicle, leaning in conspiratorially. His eyes darted nervously toward Jian's office door. "He's talking to HR about downsizing the admin pool," David whispered, the scent of fear radiating off him. "He's using the projection error as leverage, saying there's misallocation of resources." "You spoke up, Elara." That was a heroic move, but Jian sees heroes as threats. "Get ready." Elara didn't flinch. She simply offered a quiet, "Thank you, David." But inside, a cool, detached part of her brain was whirring, cross-referencing this information with her mission brief. Hostile work environment confirmed. Discriminatory practices confirmed. Risk to acquisition confirmed. Later that evening, Elara was not heading home to a tiny, uncomfortable apartment. She was whisked away by a black, unmarked SUV to a vast, brownstone penthouse overlooking Central Park. The interior was furnished not with trendy luxury, but with history and gravitas. She didn't change into sweatpants. Instead, she removed her synthetic blouse and cheap skirt, revealing designer maternity wear, and settled into a chair beside a massive, antique mahogany globe. She didn't open her admin laptop. Instead, she powered up a slim, silver satellite communication device. "Status report on Apex, Elara?" a crisp, British voice asked through the secure line. "Negative on cultural integration, Mr. Hayes," Elara Vance replied, her voice losing every trace of the nervous tremor she used in the Apex conference room. It was now clear, strong, and authoritative. The CEO, Jian Li, exhibits profound, systemic bias. He conflates efficiency with cruelty, and views any perceived personal life, especially pregnancy, as a fundamental threat to corporate value. He nearly submitted inaccurate projections today, which I caught. His response was disciplinary, not grateful. "And your recommendation for the acquisition?" Mr. Hayes asked. Elara adjusted the elegant, heavy silver bracelet on her wrist. A piece worth more than Jian's entire quarterly bonus. My recommendation remains unchanged. Proceed immediately with the acquisition, but bypass the current leadership structure. He is not fit to run a subsidiary of Nexus Holdings. I will be making a personal, on-site demonstration of his unsuitability. She paused, a genuine moment of steel entering her eyes. He just made a $50 million mistake, and he's about to make an existential one. Jian Li stood in the doorway of his private office, beckoning Elara with a slight, almost imperceptible flick of his finger. He had positioned himself precisely. The door was propped open just enough for the staff in the central bullpen to hear the echo of his voice, but they couldn't see Elara's face. It was a performance designed for maximal humiliation and maximal message clarity. Disloyalty and weakness will be publicly purged. Elara walked slowly, her movements exaggerated by the sheer weight of the child she carried. The cold air of the office felt suddenly stifling. Sit, Elara, Jian commanded, his voice perfectly modulated, smooth and dangerously calm. He didn't look at her, he looked at the skyline outside his massive window, a symbol of his singular focus. I've reviewed your temporary contract and your performance over the last 3 weeks. While your fundamental skills are adequate, you did, after all, catch an error. Your commitment to Apex Capital's core philosophy is lacking. Elara placed her hands carefully on her belly, trying to maintain her professional composure. Mr. Li, I am fully committed. I arrive early, I stay late, and I have completed every task assigned to me. Jian finally turned, cutting her off with a wave of his hand. The arrogant smirk that played on his lips was far more cutting than anger. Don't insult my intelligence with compliance metrics, Elara. I'm speaking about sustainability. We are an institution that operates 24/7. We require staff dedicated to uninterrupted performance. Your current status, he paused, his gaze dropping to her stomach with brutal, calculated judgment, represents an unacceptable systemic risk to our quarterly focus. He leaned over his desk, his voice hardening into a steel rod. You are terminated, effective immediately. David will process your final severance check. You should have prioritized your family over this company. You are a liability. Elara's breath hitched. She had been prepared for this, but the cold, clinical cruelty of his words still stung, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. This is discriminatory, Mr. Li. You are firing me because I am pregnant. That is illegal. Jian laughed, a short, dry, dismissive sound. You'll find my legal team is highly compensated, Elara. We are a private firm with at-will employment clauses. The official reason is poor cultural fit and inadequate alignment with Apex efficiency goals. The truth is, I don't employ distractions. Now, sign the termination waiver and allow security to escort you off the floor. The isolation was immediate. As Jian pressed a buzzer on his desk, 2 massive, uniformed security guards materialized at the office door. The sound of their heavy footsteps echoing in the silence sent a wave of icy panic through Elara. David, hovering near the bullpen, saw the guards escorting Elara out. He watched her shoulders slump, her profile radiating shame and exhaustion. He wanted to shout, to run over and tell them Jian was a monster, but the sheer gravity of Jian's power, the fear of losing his own meticulously climbed rung on the ladder, kept David rooted to the spot. A silent alley, paralyzed by self-preservation. Elara signed the papers, her hand shaking slightly, refusing to look Jian in the eye. She clutched a small cardboard box containing a notepad and a cheap coffee mug, the meager sum of her professional existence here. As the guards began to steer her toward the elevators, Elara finally looked up at Jian. He was already turned back to his window, dismissive, the matter already forgotten. In that moment, the timid administrative assistant vanished. Elara's eyes, though wet with unshed tears, were suddenly clear, hard, and terrifyingly cold. She held his gaze until the elevator doors whispered shut, carrying her and the quiet dignity of her righteous anger away. The game, she thought, was officially on. Elara stood on the sidewalk, the cold January wind immediately cutting through the thin fabric of her coat. The tiny cardboard box felt insulting in her hands, holding the sum total of her temporary life at Apex Capital. The false defeat, the public shame of being escorted out, was a bitter pill. She had lost the cover, the access, and the flimsy job she had taken for her due diligence mission. She felt a profound sense of failure wash over her, a failure not for herself, but for the principle of fair assessment. Suddenly, the glass revolving door spun, and David burst out, looking like a deer caught in headlights. He clutched a sealed, white office envelope. "Elara, wait," he called out, his voice pitched high with suppressed panic. He glanced quickly back at the Apex lobby, fear etched across his face. "Your last check." Jian wanted it hand-delivered to make a point, I guess. He thrust the envelope into her hand. His fingers brushed hers, a cold, fleeting touch, and then he was gone, spinning back into the warmth of the building without another word. Elara stared at the envelope, expecting nothing more than the meager final wages. She pulled the folded paper out. It was a blank severance letter. Confused, she shook the envelope again. This time, a slim, matte black flash drive clattered into her palm. The suddenness of the gift, and the danger David had risked to deliver it, made her heart pound. She quickly slipped the flash drive into the small, hidden interior pocket of her cheap handbag and hailed a taxi. 20 minutes later, Elara was securely locked inside the opulent living room of her penthouse, the city lights below twinkling like scattered jewels. She put the kettle on, a simple, grounding ritual, then pulled out the flash drive. The scent of rain and city grime still clung to her coat, a stark contrast to the old-world luxury of her surroundings. She plugged the drive into her secure, encrypted tablet. It didn't ask for a password. Instead, a simple file folder opened, labeled, Apex, Logs, Private. Elara scanned the contents. It wasn't just emails or calendar events. It was Jian Li's unedited, audio-annotated private work journal, meticulously kept over 5 years. It included everything. His justification for firing underperforming staff, his internal monologues, his true, venomous feelings about soft, Western management, and the detailed, searing memories of barbarous betrayal, the specific history that had fueled his fear of pregnant women. She listened to an entry from 6 months ago, Jian's voice arrogant and casual. "Terminated Jensen today. Man's kid had the flu for 3 days. Family is weakness. I don't pay people to manage their personal life." A wave of cold certainty washed over Elara, replacing the earlier shame. This was not just a discrimination case. This was a pattern of corporate malice, a consistent, illegal undermining of shareholder value through fear and prejudice. Jian Li wasn't just a bad boss, he was a cancer on the entire organization. The shift in Elara's mind was instantaneous and total. The exhaustion vanished. Her posture straightened, the temporary administrative assistant disappearing completely. She was Elara Vance, chairman-designate of Nexus Holdings. Her mindset moved decisively from victim to planner. Jian thought he had won a small battle by removing a perceived risk. He failed to realize he hadn't removed the risk, he had just handed the demolition plans to the architect. She picked up her private phone, the one only used for Nexus business. Her voice was steady, the sound of a CEO making a final, strategic decision. "Mr. Hayes, proceed with the hostile acquisition filing immediately," she instructed, the tea forgotten. "And dispatch the Blackwater team. The focus is no longer just on value. It's on ethical extraction. I have all the evidence we need to legally and publicly dismantle Mr. Jian Li. Tell the attorneys to prepare the papers for his immediate, non-negotiable removal. Operation Apex Justice is a go." The days following Elara's firing were a blur of cold, calculating strategy. She worked from her command center, a hidden office adjacent to the penthouse library, surrounded by screens displaying complex financial models and legal precedents. The gentle, rhythmic breathing of her sleeping 5-year-old daughter, Nina, in the next room was the quiet rhythm to her methodical revenge. Elara was no longer merely building a case, she was constructing a perfect, inescapable trap. She spent hours cross-referencing Jian's private journal entries, the ones David had risked everything to provide, with official HR records. Every instance of an employee being fired for taking extended sick leave, for family emergencies, or, pointedly, for starting a family, was logged and meticulously documented as a pattern of systemic ethical and shareholder value violations. These were the grounds that would destroy Jian's reputation among his peers. Something far worse to him than a simple lawsuit. Meanwhile, back at Apex Capital, Jian Li was basking in the glow of his supposed victory. He strutted through the office, a renewed spring in his step. The liability was gone. He hired a new, young, male temp, a man who, Jian announced loudly to the bullpen, doesn't have any life complications that take precedence over the company's fiscal needs. He was oblivious, drowning in his own hubris. He held an impromptu meeting where he boasted about the efficiency gains already realized since Elara's departure, oblivious that the very man he was celebrating to, David, was sweating through his shirt, the weight of the secret flash drive heavy on his conscience. See, David? Problem solved, Jian had smirked, dropping a pile of files onto David's desk. The weak links are always the ones who think they're entitled to something. She thought she was entitled to a paycheck and a maternity leave while offering substandard performance. That nonsense doesn't fly here. David swallowed, refusing to meet Jian's gaze. He knew Jian was talking about Elara, but the thinly veiled insults felt like a verbal assault on his own moral integrity. He was enduring the abuse, not just for his job, but to protect the integrity of the data he had passed on. Elara's operation was entirely silent. There were no grand threats or angry phone calls. Instead, there were quiet meetings in unmarked buildings with lawyers specializing in high-frequency corporate takedowns. There were subtle movements in the stock market, small, untraceable trades initiated by Nexus Holdings that began to softly deflate Apex Capital's valuation. Tick, tick, tick. The tables were turning, but Jian couldn't hear the clock. He was too busy celebrating his short-term win. One evening, Elara sat with Nina, reading a picture book about a tortoise that outsmarted a boastful hare. Nina looked up, her innocent eyes wide. "Mommy, why did the mean boss yell at you?" Elara smoothed her daughter's hair. "He didn't yell at me, sweetie. He yelled at an idea he was afraid of. He confused being strong with being cruel. Sometimes, the strongest people are the quiet ones, the ones who know how to wait and how to plan." She gave Nina a comforting squeeze, but the words were also a commitment to herself. She wasn't fighting for a job anymore. She was fighting for a legacy, for a world where her daughter would never be judged as a liability because of her existence. The final piece of the trap was set when a strange, official-looking document arrived on Jian Li's desk. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a formal summons to a mandatory stakeholder resolution meeting, scheduled to take place at the Apex Annual Gala. It was filed under an obscure subsidiary of a shell corporation, totally untraceable back to Elara Vance. Jian glanced at it, scoffed at the bureaucracy, and tossed it into the pile of compliance paperwork, utterly convinced he had won. The fuse to the explosion was now lit. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt sparkled with the aggressive sheen of high finance. It was the night of the Apex Capital Stakeholder Gala, an event designed less for celebration and more for the projection of untouchable success. Crystal chandeliers blazed, reflecting off acres of polished marble and the 100 expensive watches on the wrists of the assembled guests. The scent was a heady, competitive mix of aged Scotch and high-end French perfume. Jian Li stood on a raised dais, bathed in a spotlight designed to enhance the sheen of his success. He was giving his keynote address, a triumphant, self-congratulatory speech on Apex's quarterly performance. David stood stiffly to the side, maintaining his professional composure, but his gaze kept nervously tracking the doors. He knew something was coming, he just didn't know what, or when. And despite recent turbulence and rumors, Jian's voice boomed, sharp and arrogant, Apex Capital remains a fortress. These so-called press leaks, detailing fabricated misconduct, are nothing more than noise from disgruntled, low-level employees, people who confuse their personal dramas with corporate commitment. "We excised the weakness," he declared, pausing for effect, "and our numbers speak for themselves." He was clearly, though indirectly, referring to Elara's termination. The room applauded, ignorant of the deeper meaning. Just as the applause began to fade, a sudden, collective hush fell over the crowd near the main entrance. Jian, blinded by the stage lights, couldn't see what had caused the disruption. Then, she appeared. Elara Smith, or rather, Elara Vance, did not walk, she glided. She wore a bespoke gown of deep emerald silk, cut to accentuate the beautiful, powerful curve of her 8-month pregnancy. The fabric draped perfectly, radiating a confidence that had been utterly absent from her cheap office wear. On her arm was a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, followed by 3 others, all carrying the cool, detached air of high-powered attorneys. Elara wore minimal jewelry, save for the single, breathtaking emerald-cut diamond pendant that pulsed with fire under the ballroom lights. She looked like royalty attending a minor court function. Jian finally squinted into the audience and saw her. He stopped mid-sentence. His arrogant smile froze, then twisted into confusion, then outrage. "Security," he hissed, stabbing a finger in her direction. "What is that woman doing here? Get that distraction out of my gala immediately. She is uninvited and clearly seeking attention." The security guards moved toward her, but Elara did not flinch. She simply detached herself from her companions and calmly stepped toward a small, portable auxiliary microphone stand set up for Q&A near the dais. Her expression was serene, yet utterly implacable. "Mr. Li," Elara's voice, amplified by the microphone, was no longer a squeak of fear. It was rich, resonant, and commanding. It stopped the advancing security guards dead in their tracks. "I assure you, I am not uninvited. I am simply unannounced." Jian stumbled down the steps of the dais, his face flushed with rage. "You have absolutely no right to be here. This is a private corporate function. I will call the police. Get off that stage, you liability." The crowd was mesmerized. The television camera set up by CNBC, which was broadcasting the gala live, was now focused solely on Elara and the furious CEO confronting her. Elara smiled, a genuinely beautiful, terrible smile. She gently touched the massive diamond at her throat. "Actually, Mr. Li," she stated, her voice cutting through the tension, "under Article 3, Section B of the Apex Holding Company's governance agreement, I am officially calling this mandatory stakeholder resolution meeting to order." The atmosphere was electric, every eye in the room wide with disbelief, waiting for the coming explosion. Jian Li advanced on Elara, his face now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "This is insane. You were a temp, a minimum wage liability. Get off the stand before I have you arrested for trespassing and defamation." His voice cracked with panic. The silence of the crowd was heavier than any roar, witnessing the collapse of their leader's control. Elara raised a hand, not to silence him, but to draw the attention of the attending media. Her voice remained calm, cutting through his rage like diamond on glass. "I am calling this meeting to order to address a pattern of gross corporate negligence and ethical breaches under Mr. Li's leadership, specifically violations related to systemic discrimination and fiduciary duty." She pulled the black flash drive from the pocket of her gown. "The evidence is here, gentlemen. 5 years of Mr. Li's own words, his private journal, detailing his calculated terminations based on personal bias, including the recent firing of an employee for the sole reason of being pregnant." She paused, allowing the gasps from the stakeholders to swell and subside. "These actions constitute reckless endangerment of Apex Capital's market value." Jian's eyes bulged. Denial was his only refuge. "Forgery, slander. You are a desperate, disgruntled woman trying to extort me. No one here believes your lies." He appealed frantically to the crowd. "She's trying to destroy everything I built." Elara kept her eyes locked on Jian. This was the moment of the climax twist, the ultimate, inescapable revelation. "Mr. Li," she said, her voice dropping to a cool, lethal register, "I wasn't just trying to extract evidence of your poor character. I was performing mandated due diligence before the completion of the acquisition." She lifted the acquisition binder, the leather shining under the chandelier light. "I was not assessing whether I was fit to work for Apex Capital. I was assessing whether you were fit to run a subsidiary of the company that was about to buy you." The ballroom exploded in confused whispers. Jian froze, suddenly pale, the blood draining from his face. By us? What are you talking about? Who are you? Elara looked directly into the CNBC camera, then back at Jian, her eyes gleaming with triumphant, elegant power. My name is Elara Vance. I am the chairman of the board and principal owner of Nexus Holdings. And as of 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Nexus Holdings has successfully closed its hostile acquisition of the 70% majority share of Apex Capital. The sheer silence that followed was terrifying. A pin dropping would have sounded like a gunshot. Jian's knees buckled slightly. He was utterly defeated, his kingdom bought out from under him by the very woman he had called a liability. He tried to backtrack, his voice pathetic and begging. Vance? Elara Vance? I had no idea. This is a misunderstanding. I thought you were, please, we can work this out. I can be a loyal employee. Elara cut him off, her face hardened by the memory of his public cruelty. She delivered the killing blow, referencing the deep-seated prejudice from his past. Your prejudice, Mr. Li, was born of an injustice suffered 15 years ago at the hands of Barbara. She was a greedy, unethical partner who betrayed you, Elara explained, her tone now explanatory, not accusatory. What you didn't know is that Barbara was disgraced by my family for that very act. We were tracking her network to clean it up. I came here, humbly, to assess your ethical standards, hoping to correct the injustice you suffered years ago and welcome you into our global structure. She stepped closer to him, the microphone catching her every breath. But instead of proving you learned from your pain, you replicated it. You saw my pregnancy, my temporary status, and immediately projected your deepest fear onto me. You chose cruelty over competence, and you chose arrogance over humility. She gestured toward her legal team, who instantly stepped forward. Mr. Li, you are relieved of all duties, effective immediately. Your access codes are deactivated. Security, please escort the former CEO from the premises. The same security guards who had marched Elara out hours before now turned, their faces grim, and gently placed their hands on the shoulders of the broken, weeping Jian Li. The CEO, defeated, humiliated, and utterly destroyed, was led away, his jaw slack with agonizing regret. The crowd erupted not in applause, but in a chaotic, shocked murmur that signaled the end of an era. The lights of the gala continued to blaze, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The crowd, initially aghast, was now buzzing with a mixture of shock, exhilaration, and opportunism. Jian Li's disgrace was already the biggest story of the quarter. Elara, standing on the dais, quietly signaled to David. The young assistant, tears of relief and exhaustion in his eyes, walked up to the stage. David, Elara said, offering a warm, genuine smile. Your moral courage in the face of fear was noted. Effective immediately, you are appointed interim CEO of Apex Capital. Your first mandate is to reverse all discriminatory terminations and establish a new corporate culture. Your second mandate is to implement the most generous maternity and paternity leave policies in the industry. David, speechless, simply nodded, clutching the heavy acquisition binder Elara handed him. He was the silent ally who had been rewarded for his integrity, and the weight of his new responsibility settled on his shoulders. In the ensuing weeks, the fall of Jian Li was swift and catastrophic. Based on the evidence from his own journal, Nexus Holdings pursued not just termination, but a lawsuit for corporate negligence and unethical practices that led to the freezing of his remaining assets. He was professionally erased, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the city. Elara gave birth to a healthy baby boy, symbolizing the successful birth of a new era at Apex, one where compassion and competence were finally merged. She oversaw the integration of the two companies, ensuring that Apex's ruthless efficiency was tempered by Nexus's profound sense of corporate responsibility. 5 years later, the air smelled strongly of overbrewed coffee and cheap institutional carpet. The walls were a faded, depressing beige. Jian Li, 5 years older, 5 years heavier, and 1,000 years wiser, was sitting behind a worn desk in a suburban bank branch. He wore a slightly shiny, ill-fitting suit, a stark contrast to the bespoke tailoring of his former life. He was a middle manager, processing small business loans, a long, agonizing climb back from bankruptcy. He looked up as the door chime rang, and in walked Barbara, the woman whose single act of betrayal had set Jian on his decade-long path of cruel efficiency. She hadn't aged well. Entitlement had etched itself into the lines around her mouth, and she was carrying a stack of papers detailing her current, failing business venture. Finally, "You're Jian, right? Listen, I need this paperwork rushed," Barbara snapped, tapping her long, crimson nail impatiently on his desk. "I told the girl at the counter I have important things to do, but she just gave me that look. Honestly, the service these days. Do you know how important this loan is?" Jian looked at her, no hatred, just a profound, exhausting recognition. Barbara was the very embodiment of the careless entitlement that he had fought against, and that he himself had mirrored in his pursuit of power. He was now forced to serve the type of person he had become. "Yes, ma'am," Jian replied, his voice flat, devoid of the old CEO arrogance. He saw his own past arrogance reflected in her sneer. "I'll process the paperwork according to standard procedure. You'll have to wait your turn. Your importance doesn't supersede the bank's policy." He had become what he once scorned, a drone, managing the very liabilities he once sought to eliminate. The irony was the heaviest weight he carried. Meanwhile, Elara Vance, seated at her original Apex desk, now refinished in warm walnut, overlooking a skyline that contained 2 Nexus buildings, signed off on a new, international philanthropic initiative focused on maternal health worldwide. David, the official CEO, walked in, beaming, to present a plaque thanking her for the new foundation of Apex culture. Elara looked down at the empty space on her calendar, then at the photograph of her 2 healthy children. The fight had been brutal, but necessary. The final moral lesson echoed, clear and strong, through the glass tower and across the vast city. Power is an accident of circumstance, but character is a choice you make every single day. The person you judge most harshly might hold the keys to your future, or, worse, they might just be a mirror reflecting the ugliness of your own prejudice. Never mistake humility for weakness, and always remember that the highest form of justice is allowing someone to be the architect of their own, self-inflicted downfall.